time for the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is the voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. What an interesting day. The last couple of days have been watching Republican governors who have been spending their time figuring out how can we possibly make desperate workers even more desperate? How can we go after those unemployed, strip them of the federal benefits? Because that $300 a week is just too darn generous. It's making people lazy, making them not want to take those crummy jobs, not making them want to go back into dangerous working conditions for poverty wages. And we can't have that. So we need to make them desperate. Even you got Joe Biden. Joe Biden saying, look, if you're offered a suitable job, you got to take it. My question is, what is suitable? If you can't feed your family on a job, is that suitable? And I think that's playing right into the Republican framework, that there are workers out there who are they're not going back because they're getting all these wonderful benefits. And again, as I said the other day, the reality of unemployment is, and this is universal across all the states, if you were employed and your employer calls you back to work and you choose not to go back, you're no longer unemployed. You're no longer eligible for unemployment. That's how the game works. So if people are calling their former workers back and saying, hey, now come back to work, there's a path for that. And it's one of these moments where you go, is this really about that they can't find people to work? Or is it they need this as a political football? Now, look, you've got the governor of, Iowa, I guess, today. Kim Reynolds coming out saying, we're going to end the state's participation with the federal government, I guess sometime early June. Cutting off that lifeline for folks. And look, you got Mississippi, you've got Arkansas, you got Alabama, you got South Carolina, you got, did I say Montana? You got that idiot out there too. You've got all these Republican governors who are now on the same page because they didn't think of this stuff on their own. This is part of a national playbook because it's simple. Really simple. Get those women back in the kitchen, making me my dinner and cleaning up my mess. Pretty simple. Because understand, most of the low-wage workforce that we're talking about in the restaurant and hospitality industry is, yes, you guessed it, single mothers, young women, older women, mostly women. See, there's a common theme there, mostly women. So oddly enough, when single moms have to take care of their kids who still schools haven't completely opened up again, you kind of got to wonder, how are we playing this? Because we don't have a child care system in this country. So what do you expect to do with them? I think of South Carolina a number of years ago, a woman had her kid play across the street at the park. 9-year-old kid was across the street playing at the park while mom was across the street at the McDonald's working. Police came, arrested her, took her away. Child abuse. Leaving your child to play in the park? How dare you? And now what we're saying is, sorry, we're going to steal what little lifeline you had to be able to make it through the rest of this pandemic and still support your family and still take care of your kids. Sorry, that's done. Back to work. And what's interesting to me is yesterday the story dropped about Jeff Bezos. Bezos evidently has bought a giant, buying a giant triple-masted $500 million super yacht. I guess it's going to be the largest thing ever built that floats. Do you think he's doing it here? Do you think the Y721 is going to be built here in the U.S.? No. It's going to be built by a Dutch company, and it's going to be registered, I believe it was Panama. And I'm going, hold on a second. Because here's the thing. Here's what we're told. We're told we got to give rich people all the money because, well, they hire poor people. The article that I was reading on the super yacht, the guy who evidently does super yacht research has told Bloomberg News that the super yacht market roaring, never better. Super yachts are flying off the shelf. Yet we can't seem to get a single mother a couple $100 extra bucks a week in her unemployment so that she can take care of her kids and put food on the table. And oh, by the way, spend money in those businesses that are now reopening. It's pretty interesting to me because, we're told that the very wealthy, they're the ones who take care of us, the benevolent. I mean, we are the richest country in the history of history. We're the richest country in the history of forever. And yet, sorry, you poor people got to go back to those crummy jobs. And I'll go back to what I said, forever. What happened to competition? What happened to bringing those people back to work and enticing them with better wages, hours, and conditions? What happened to competition? What happened to the free market going, hey, we got a shortage of workers. We need to compete for those workers with higher wages and better things like better hours, better working conditions. Because you ask any of these people who work in the hospitality industry, restaurants, hotels, bars, any of this stuff, they're horrible conditions. Dealing with people is horrible. I wouldn't want to do it. I don't want anybody else to have to do it. And to entice these people to come back after being locked up for 16 months, can you imagine how unbearable we are to have to deal with after now the gates flood open and all of these Karens and Carls and crazy people rushing to the local watering hole? Can you imagine? And you're going to do that for what, $2.96 an hour plus tips? Because yes, that is the federal minimum wage for tipped employees. And you wonder, well, we can't get people to come work for barely minimum wage. It's crazy. So what you've got is you got the Republicans who are in these Republican-led states, and there are going to be more, trust me, there are going to be many more, who are pushing this idea that we need to force people back to work. We need to force them out, make them desperate enough and hungry enough so that they'll do it. And look, this is a political winner for them. I absolutely agree it's a political winner because it does a whole bunch of things. It gives them a target for the rage machine. Gives the rage machine someone to attack. Those lazy people, how dare they? They're getting something I'm not. I'm paying for it. It works perfectly. It's beautiful. It gives them someone vulnerable and defenseless to target on, to beat up on, to attack, because they know those people can't defend themselves. And they can stoke that jealousy. How come I don't get that? That race hatred that we all love so much. You can stoke, of course, attacking those single mothers, punishing those single mothers. How dare they? I mean, it's a winner, because especially on the right, because it gets to tick off all of those angry boxes, and it gets to keep people all riled up. And it's just those people down there anyway. It's not hardworking people like us, just those lazy people. It's always amazing to me, and I talk to people all the time about it. Have you ever worked with lazy people? Oh, yeah. It turns out half the people you ask that question to are the lazy people themselves. This is a political winner. Understand that for them. And the Republicans get it because they get to change the topic. Because they have no agenda, they have no policy, they have no way to make working conditions better. All they have to do is make people desperate enough. Force people's hands into being desperate enough to force them back into horrible conditions. And then shame them. Here in Pennsylvania, we have this thing going on as well, where we're stripping power away from a Democratic governor, because that's their aim, without thinking that someday down the road we may have a Republican who may want to do something. Doesn't matter. They're trying to strip power from government to be able to respond to crisis, so that they can never do this stuff again. never make sure that people's unemployment is secure and that they get a little bit extra so that they can survive a global pandemic. And what's really twisted to me is that you get working people who are looking at other working people and saying, you don't deserve, you don't need. It's really remarkable, while not looking at someone like Bezos or our billionaire class, who literally, in the moment that we need them the most, are walking away from us. It's, I know, but Rick, he pays $15 an hour at Amazon. Yeah, but here's the thing. Those jobs 30 years ago were paying in today's dollars $25 an hour with healthcare benefits and all kinds of stuff. And not the kind of robotic, hyper-managed working conditions that you see today. And the thing is I look at this moment. And the Republicans, they're masters at divide and conquer. They're masters at picking the targets and going after them. If it's not the bathroom issue, if it's not the marriage issue, it's not the most way out extreme religious issue, it's this. They've picked their targets because they know who they're targeting. These are folks at the bottom of the socioeconomic ladder. These are people who are struggling to begin with. And finally a point in their life, things have gotten just a touch better. And now they're saying, no, you got to go back to that. We need someone to cook us dinner and clean up our mess. And it's really playing into this political move on the right of restraining governmental power to respond to crisis and bringing the craziest of the crazy out into the political sphere. I came across an article the other day over at ProPublica where, now you've got the people who rioted on January 6th, calling them the 1-6ers. They're now taking pride in the fact that they attacked the Capitol. Now, understand, it's always been my belief that there are Republicans who would have cheered on 9/11 if the DNC headquarters was in one of the Twin Towers. You saw after Oklahoma City, and it's coming out now because of Josh Hawley, that there were the defenders of the militia types, Josh Hawley being one of them. That's who these people have always been. And this is what I've said for a very long time. It's not about country for them. It's about power, pure unadulterated power, their economic gain. Who benefits by forcing these low-wage workers back into poverty wages? Well, corporate America, big conglomerates, but also upper middle class white business owners. They seem to do really well. And I keep coming back to this moment of in the world that they keep telling us they believe in, invisible hand, competition, reward for work. They keep telling us they believe this stuff. When it comes down to action, not so much. I'm even seeing right now people who have been sending me stuff, conservative stuff over the years, now talking about guest worker programs. Well, if those people won't go back to work, we'll just bring in people to replace them. Again, it's all about the cheap labor. It's all about the exploitive labor. Instead of saying, how can we encourage people? How can we make things better? Like the childcare issue. For me, the childcare issue for women, the single biggest issue that they've got going on right now. You want people to come back to those jobs, figure out how to get them childcare. Because guess what? The schools, they're still not completely open. And I know this is where you got people running for school boards all across the country going, we should have had kids back in school. I actually had someone tell me today, and this is one of those really bizarre moments. I actually had someone tell me today that if we did nothing during the pandemic, did nothing at all, fewer people would have died. And look, here's the great part about their argument. You can't prove them wrong. You can't go back and retest it. You can't go back and say, well, this is what would have happened. Because they go, look at Florida. I go, yeah, look at Florida. I don't trust anything that's come out of Florida. I don't really trust anything that's come out of the state governments for a while, because they're all trying to fudge the numbers. I think the death toll from the virus has been much higher. I think many more people have been sick with it. But again, this is a political game. They keep throwing back and forth at us. But I had this guy telling me that more people died because of staying home, because families weren't protecting themselves. I go, but they're home. They're with their families. They were still spreading. And I'm going, oh, so being at home with your family, worse than being in large crowds with thousands of people. And that seems to be the thought process, which is kind of frightening, because there's part of me that goes, no matter what you tell this person, as long as there's an R attached to the statement, going to buy it. And the Republican machine has been funding think tanks and writers and thought leaders for such a long time that have been spewing this stuff that people buy it. And it's one of those things that just kind of, on a certain level, defies logic. But I go back to the reality. All of that stuff aside, we're still looking at each other in the working class. We're still looking at the person who's struggling to find a job, the business owner who claims there aren't people out there willing to work for minimum wage. And we're not focusing on the Bezoses and just the obscene wealth that has been just hoarded during this pandemic. And it's quite remarkable to me. And I guess on the other side, we'll look back on this and I hope reevaluate, and I hope do something policy-wise if we ever have another one of these, and if we're around in 100 years. But I fear not. I fear we're so divided, so polarized, that no matter where the attack comes from, it's all going to be viewed through a political lens. Scary times. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you know anyone who's unemployed who's decided not to because they're lazy? I'd love to hear it. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back.
There's nothing more American than workers standing up, and the union gives a voice to win. On the Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1967. That was the day United Farm Workers Sons of Zapata joined with the Confederation of Mexican Workers in establishing an international picket line across the Rio Grande Valley. A push to organize farm workers at 6 major growers began the year before, in the spring of 1966. Wages in Starr County ranged from 40 to 85 cents an hour. Farm workers began their strike in June of 1966 for wage increases and union recognition. But growers would rather see their crops rot than recognize the union. They did grant wage increases, but immediately ran to the courts for injunctions. One district judge outlawed all picketing, while police instructed county workers to spray the strikers with insecticide. That August, workers voted to organize with the United Farm Workers and began a pilgrimage march to the state capitol to popularize their cause. 15,000 workers and their supporters reached Austin on Labor Day to demand their right to organize. They returned to Starr County to continue their strike. The growers turned to Mexican commuters holding green cards to break the strike. The United Farm Workers began picketing at Roma and Rio Grande City bridges and were often successful in turning back green card workers. By May 1967, melon harvest had begun. After months of negotiations, picket lines went up on both sides of the international bridges. The picketing was 100% successful for 2 days, but the Mexican government and Starr County Sheriff's Department soon intervened to break up the picket lines. Texas Rangers were brought in to arrest and brutalize strikers. The strike was broken, but organizing continued throughout the region. Picketing across borders was itself an important act of international solidarity.
Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So I'm still hung up on the $500 million super yacht, triple mast super yacht, made overseas, flagged overseas. I wonder if it'll ever touch U.S. soil, or maybe it'll just ride around and go ha ha. Maybe I'll laugh from the shore. I don't know. And look at all the money that we spent to help build his little boat. It's crazy. And yet we still don't have people in D.C. going, yeah, we should be taxing those folks a little bit higher because we've got needs. We've got health care that people need. We've got homeless veterans on the street. We've got kids hungry. We got so many things that we need to do. But hey, remember, those rich people spend the money and they give us poor people jobs. Anyway, here to share some thoughts on their latest incredible report. The Institute for Policy Studies has released their 27th annual Executive Excess Report, Pandemic Pay Plunder. I've got one of the folks who's high into that, Sarah Anderson. She's a Global Economy Project Director and the co-editor of inequality.org, and one of the folks behind Pandemic Pay Plunder. Say that 10 times fast. Sarah, thanks for taking time for us.
Great to be here. Thank you.
So how bad is it? How bad was the plunder? How full are their pockets? And has anything ever spilled out of those pockets for the rest of us to fight over?
Well, that's what we wanted to look at in this report. And so the way we went about it is we looked at the 100 S&P 500 corporations with the lowest median worker pay. So these are 100 of the largest low-wage employers in America. And we wanted to see in a year of such great suffering for low-wage workers, and a year when so many of them were demonstrating how essential they are to our economy and our public health, did these companies alter their pay practices at all? And what we found was that, yes, most of them did alter their pay practices, but it was mostly to inflate their CEO pay. So 51 of these 100 low-wage employers had rigged their own rules to inflate their CEO pay. And I can give a few examples so people know what I'm talking about. One example would be Carnival Cruise Line, which had employees stranded out on ships in the middle of the ocean. They could not get home. And yet the board gave the CEO a retention award, which boosted his pay to $13 million. Well, they still had people stuck on those ships. And that made his pay about 500 times as much as their median worker pay. And I can give you a lot more examples of how corporations bent over backwards to shield their CEO from pandemic risk, while it was the frontline workers who were really out there keeping our economy going and facing the highest risks.
Yeah, I know, during the whole pandemic, we heard a lot. There were heroes, frontline heroes, essential workers, and a couple of them gave out some pennies and some praise, nice press releases. But those pennies didn't stay, because a lot of those corporations then, they gaveth and they then taketh away, a short time later. In fact, I look at Kroger, one of the areas, raised, you said, hey, if you're going to call these people heroes and essential, you're going to pay them. They ended up bailing out of the state altogether.
Yeah, and we looked at Chipotle, where again, the CEO did not meet his bonus goals, but the company came in anyway and moved the bonus goalposts so that he could get a $38 million compensation package. Now, they were one of those companies that offered a little bit of hazard pay in the beginning of the pandemic. They gave them a 10% increase on their base wage, which average pay at Chipotle has been $12 an hour. So they were giving people $1.20 an hour extra to go back into those restaurants and take those high risks. But as you said, they cut off that hazard pay after a few months. So in the fall, when the infection rate started going up again, most of these companies that had offered low wage workers hazard pay had already cut it off. They also claimed that they offered paid COVID leave time to their workers, but a lot of their workers said, hey, nobody informed us of that. And when I went to ask for leave time, my manager told me to take unpaid leave. So now you've got a situation where Chipotle just announced yesterday that they're scrambling to hire people to staff their restaurants. And you were talking about this earlier about the so-called labor shortage. Well, I have to think if Chipotle and others had treated their workers a little bit better during the pandemic, they wouldn't be in this situation now where they claim to have a labor shortage.
No, it's an excellent point. And I go back to my original thought, which has been, if you need people to come work for you, you got to pay them better. I mean, if there is truly a shortage, and as you've said, you treated them poorly, you got to entice them back with something better treatment, better pay, better hours, whatever.
Absolutely. And maybe not bend the rules so that the guy in the corner office gets these absurd pay packages. I mean, think of how demoralizing that would have been for workers who are really putting themselves at risk every day for that company. But the guy, shielded away in the corner office is the one that they're doing cartwheels to make sure that he gets this massive payout.
I mean, it's mind blowing to me on the. It's right in front of us, and yet we're still fighting over these kind of bizarre things like the unemployment thing. I'm still stuck on this. Just to compare Bezos and his $500 million super yacht to some single mother in Mississippi getting an extra couple $100 to be able to feed her family. It's just nuts, and that's who we're attacking. It's nuts to me.
Absolutely, and especially at a time when, like I said, these workers have been out there on the front lines, keeping our economy and our society functioning. And if there ever was a time for us to rethink our reward system and how skewed it is, I had to read all of these corporate proxy statements, which is where they lay out what their executive compensation plans are, and they justify these ridiculous, rule rigging maneuvers to pump up the CEO pay. And one after another said, well, this was critical to retain top talent. They still have this mindset that it's this one individual in the corner office who's almost single-handedly creating the company value, when of course it's the people out there actually doing the work that are really creating the value. So like I said, if there ever was a time to look hard at our reward system and how skewed it is between the people who are doing the absolute necessary work to keep food on our tables, keep our elderly and our children taken care of, all of these basic needs that they're meeting, but getting so poorly rewarded for it, and we really need to turn that around.
So is there a way to combat this? Is there I've always said we need to go back to the good socialist president Dwight David Eisenhower's tax code. That's the only way we get to tap this stuff down. To where the more they make, the more they're going to have to pay in taxes. So the incentive to pay these obscene salaries goes down, and the incentive to pay people better may be there as it once was. But is there a way forward on this? Because it's when I'm looking at these CEO to pay ratios, they're just 4, 5, 6, 7, 800 times to one. It's insane to me.
It is insane. Well, we need various tools, and I support, a wealth tax and increasing taxes on capital gains and all that. But the most direct reform related to this problem of CEO to worker pay is the Tax Excessive CEO Pay Act, which has been introduced in the House and the Senate. And the way it would work is that the wider a company's gap between CEO and worker pay, the higher their corporate tax rate. So if you're a company like Walmart or Amazon or Home Depot, many other companies that are paying their CEO more than 500 times what they pay their median worker, they would have an increase in their tax rate of 5 percentage points. And there's graduated rates. If you're paying your CEO less than 50 times median worker pay, you wouldn't owe any more under this. And there's movement on this at the state and city level. So 2 cities in the United States are already doing this kind of tax. Portland, Oregon has had it enforced for a few years, and then San Francisco passed it through a ballot measure last fall. So those 2 cities will be generating revenue from these kinds of taxes, but it's also a way to incentivize companies to narrow their gaps by lifting up worker pay and reining in these ridiculous levels of CEO pay.
I got to tell you, I think 500 to 1 is totally ridiculous. I think that that needs to be reined in, and that's our target. That's the goal that we want to get to. And we're not even talking about what the 60s and 70s look like when you were talking 20 to 30 to 1. Now we're talking 500 to 1 is reining it in. Man, have things gotten out of hand.
Yeah, well, that's the highest tax rate would apply to those companies. But if you pay, between 50 to 100 times median worker pay, then you would pay also a tax increase. So
okay.
It goes up like that. So it wouldn't just be on those very tippy top ones. There would be graduated rates. And you're right. There's no reason why we need to have executives making hundreds, if not thousands of times more than their typical workers. In 1980, the gap was, 40 to 1, and companies somehow were able to function. And, in my view, CEOs haven't gotten a whole lot more brilliant or highly functioning since then. So the extreme levels of CEO pay today have nothing to do with executive performance.
No, I agree with you. And it's one of these things where you go, I would argue that the CEOs of the last couple of decades have done more harm to their companies and done more harm to the country than they've done good. They should be paying us back.
Yeah, it's really hard to hold them accountable, especially when you have that much wealth. You tend to have excessive power as well. And so we're not just fighting the economic inequality, we're fighting the inequality in power. And as long as we have so much money in the hands of so few at the top, we're going to be battling them every step of the way when we try to fight for reforms that would be better for working people.
Yeah, no, a lot of these companies, I've asked people, how many of these big companies who have these CEO pays through the roof and are, basically clawing these raises back from their workforce, how many of them took government money when we had that big giant trough of corporate money from the first pandemic relief bill? How many of them got stuff from that? Or are you able to look at that at all?
Well, I think most of the companies that we were looking at have too many employees to be able to qualify for the CARES Act, like the PPP program and so forth. Now, some of them did benefit, though, when the Federal Reserve funneled a ton of money into the bond markets and made credit more accessible. Carnival Cruise Lines, for example, would be one of those. There's also, of course, the airlines, got the huge bailouts in that first CARES Act. So, but we were looking at the lowest wage employers and with lots of employees, and most of them did not qualify for that bailout assistance.
So,
but they take in subsidies and taxpayer assistance in many other ways. There's no real big company in America that isn't relying on taxpayer assistance in some form or another, either tax breaks or government contracts or something. And what that means is that we should have a lot of leverage over these companies. I think every tax dollar that goes to companies should come with conditions. It should require them to pay decent wages. I like creative ideas, like they should be required to put workers on their boards. Like a lot of European companies do. And, coincidentally, they have a lot narrower gaps between CEO and worker pay there. We could require government contractors to have collective bargaining agreements. I mean, we could get really creative with the power that we have, the power of the public purse. To put conditions on companies. And it's a really good time to talk about it because a lot of money is going to be going out the door through the infrastructure spending to companies. And we should make sure that is really well spent.
No, I'm right there with you. And I'm glad you brought up collective bargaining because, as someone who's been in the union for years and someone who has helped negotiate contracts over the years, sitting across from a CEO who makes 1,000 times what the average worker makes, that is a strong argument of why the workforce needs a raise. This is why I keep going back to we need to reunionize this country. We need to get back to the days of 35% union density so that we can sit down across from those CEOs and go, you know what, your nose has been in the trough long enough. You're taking too much of the work that we're performing and keeping it for yourselves. We want some of it.
Absolutely. And Rick, I have to tell you a really depressing story from my week this week, which was we were planning an event today to release our report on CEO to worker pay. And I really wanted a worker perspective in the panel event that we did. And we had a worker lined up who was really eager to do it. It happened to be a worker who's involved in a union organizing drive in the workplace. And this person had to pull out at the last minute because the company had, I think, gotten wind of this and had really accelerated their intimidation tactics of this person. And it was so sad to me because it said so much about, well, here's why we have these huge gaps. Look at the power differential here when companies can get away with these kinds of union busting tactics. And think about the stories that we don't get to hear because people are afraid to speak out. And so, the Amazon fight in Alabama really put a spotlight on these kinds of union busting tactics, but it is so much bigger than Amazon. And it was just such a sad statement to have to deal with this week because it just said it all, right? It says so much about the power imbalance in our economy.
As someone who's done organizing over the years, you see that look on people's faces when they know they can't because they're worried about being able to pay their bills. And look, I empathize with them. You got kids to feed, you got bills to pay. The laws are so badly skewed, which is why I'm glad Joe Biden's talking about the PRO Act. I'm glad he's done some of the things that he's done, and I hope he goes further. And I hope the Democrats get their heads out of their behinds and really push for comprehensive total labor law reform this time, finally, because I don't know that there's going to be much time down the road. Real quick, back to the report. What are you hoping to get out of this? The 27th annual executive excess report. What are you hoping to get out of this?
I'm hoping it'll boost support for the tax idea that I talked about earlier, the Tax Excessive CEO Pay Act, which would incentivize companies to narrow their gaps, but also raise a lot of revenue that we could put towards good, job creation and other things that we really need. Now is the time to be talking about this. We're in a debate over a really massive spending plan, and we need tax revenue raisers to help pay for that, and this is one of the ones that should be on the table.
There you go. Pandemic Paid Plunder, written by the good folks over at the Institute for Policy Studies. We'll get links out on social media how you can get the report and check it out. Sarah, I appreciate you taking some time for us. Thanks so much.
Great to be here. Bye-bye.
Good stuff. Sarah Anderson, Global Economy Project Director there, co-editor of inequality.org. Quick break, right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1894. That was the first day of the Pullman strike. The strike started in the company town of Pullman, on the south side of Chicago, where workers made luxury sleeping cars for passenger trains. As a depression swept the nation, workers had seen their wages slashed, but rents owed to the company owner George Pullman stayed the same. The strike won support from the American Railway Union and its leader, Eugene V. Debs. The American American Railway Union called for a boycott of all Pullman cars, and more than 250,000 railway workers participated in the work action against Pullman. The strike was crushed by legal injunctions and with federal troops. In a case that went all the way to the Supreme Court, Eugene V. Debs was imprisoned for his support of the boycott. One prominent supporter of the strike was Chicago area Reverend William H. Cardawine. The Reverend supported the strikers from his pulpit. After the strike, his book, The Pullman Strike, helped spread the word of Pullman. In it, he warned, "We as a nation are dividing ourselves, like ancient Rome, into two classes, the rich and the poor, the oppressor and the oppressed. On the side of the oppressor, there is power and protection, class legislation, and military support. We are following in the tracks of ancient Rome," he wrote, "instead of learning lessons from her failures and defeats. No country can prosper, no government long perpetuate itself and its institutions, which does not administer judgment and justice alike to all its people." These words from Reverend Carwadine seem more relevant than ever today. Will we heed his warning?
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So the big story today coming out of, I guess, the Arkansas-Tennessee line there, the I-40 bridge, which I've gone over, they're going over the Mississippi River, evidently has a giant crack in it. There's a problem. One of the inspectors has come across this crack. Nobody's allowed on it. They've shut it completely down. And I'll tell you, my first thought, and this is horrible, my first thought was, they do inspections? We've got inspectors? Because you keep hearing all these stories of how, we've been slashing and burning inspections. I was shocked they actually found it. But for me, this is another one of those stories on why we need to invest in our infrastructure. And here to share some thoughts on how maybe we do that. Maybe got some thoughts on the I-40 bridge, and thank goodness it didn't collapse into the drink. I've asked our good friend Scott Paul, he's the president of the Alliance for American Manufacturing, AmericanManufacturing.org, their website. Scott, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, Rick, it's great to be with you as always.
So I'm glad it wasn't a tragedy. I'm glad we don't have a bunch of more fishing cars out of the Mississippi River. But giant crack, major interstate, major commerce point, real problems.
Yeah, it's you mentioned you'd been over that bridge. I've been over that bridge. That bridge gets hundreds of thousands of vehicles on it every day. And it is another data point that suggests that we're long overdue for infrastructure investment. The American Society of Civil Engineers gives our bridges a C grade, which is, average, I guess, if you're a student, and I guess it's technically passing, but it's not great. It's not great. It means that, for every bridge out there that's good, there's one that's not. There are something on the order of 50,000 bridges in the United States that are structurally deficient. There are 178 million trips taken over those bridges every day. So that's the kind of roulette I don't want to play, and I don't think anybody should have to play. And so I'm glad there's focus on infrastructure of all types, and in particular with respect to bridges and roads. I think this is very important because it shouldn't take a tragedy to get a policy change or a new investment. And my sense is that the Biden administration realizes that. And so I'm hopeful that we can start this process of getting the American Jobs Act, across the finish line and getting some of that much needed funding onto these states and localities so that they can both do maintenance and also rebuild bridges that are long overdue for replacement as well.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, this wasn't a tragedy because, as you've said, this is the main drag getting in and out of both of those states. This is a major commerce point. If this were to go down, wow, I can't imagine the catastrophe that would have been.
Yeah, it's yeah, it'd be bad because yeah, right across from Memphis, major east-west point for a lot of commercial traffic, truck traffic, and just the idea that all of us are potentially driving over bridges every day that may not have this same inspection regimen and may have some of these cracks in them is obviously disconcerting. And
Yeah.
so let's get Congress on the ball. And, again, I'm pleased that Biden, that the president is talking to Republicans to see if they're willing to come to the table on this. But ultimately, we need to get these investments across the finish line and get these resources out to the states and localities so that they can rebuild these bridges. It'll be good, obviously, for safety, as we've mentioned. It'll be good for the economy because it will create jobs in manufacturing and in construction. And it will be good more broadly for our competitiveness because it's hard to be competitive when you have a hard time getting your truck traffic across the country or your rail traffic or anything else in an efficient manner.
Yeah, does this move someone like Marsha Blackburn's vote to a yes, we need infrastructure vote or not? I mean, because ultimately it's going to come down to you need some Republicans to come on board. Tennessee is a Republican state. Arkansas, I mean, come on, there are 4 senators right there. Those are 4 votes going. Yeah, obviously we need infrastructure investment.
Yeah. Yeah, we do. And it's interesting because when any of those officials have been statewide elected officials or local elected officials, they've been all for the infrastructure and trying to get the money into the roads and bridges. But something happens when they come to Washington and they lose those insights, and it becomes very partisan, and it also becomes very, they don't want to talk about new revenue sources or even, rolling back tax cuts for corporations that used their last round of tax cuts to do stock buybacks and to ship jobs overseas. So I don't quite understand the logic, particularly if these Republican senators are trying to appeal to working class voters whose taxes wouldn't be touched by any of the proposals that the Biden administration has made. But hopefully we can make some progress, and it should not take a tragedy to get something started, which is why I'm glad there really is an infrastructure week, an infrastructure effort, infrastructure leadership coming from the administration. But now we need Congress to get behind this and get this moving.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems like there's so many things every day that keep coming up. You're going infrastructure over here, infrastructure. Over the weekend, for instance, you had this Colonial Pipeline shut down. You've even got people like Ben Sass going, we're not prepared. Go, yeah, which is why I've been saying infrastructure should be a national security issue. Maybe we run this through the defense bill, since that seems to be the only way we get things done.
Yeah, I think for a number of different reasons. I mean, there's a lot to unpack with the Colonial Pipeline. I mean, obviously cybersecurity, a big concern there, and the fact that private pipeline companies don't have systems in place that are able to deter cyber intrusions or ransomware is really disconcerting, to say the least. And this is critical infrastructure. You've seen, and I obviously live in the D.C. area, and there's panic buying of gas because people are uncertain about what this means in the days ahead. Now everybody's reassuring us that there's not a shortage and this will be perfectly fine. But Rick, it also begs the question of why should we need to depend on kind of this archaic system of energy delivery when we can begin the transition to electric vehicles as well. That's going to be with the right cyber protections in place, far more resilient, and we don't have to worry about shipments coming from abroad or from offshore platforms or anything like that. And so it's we got a lot of work to do to build up a new energy infrastructure, new energy systems, and new infrastructure. We talked about roads and bridges, but we got to do this for broadband. We got to do it for schools. We got to do it for childcare. There's lots of needs that we have to get our economy both back on track and then to make it more equitable and to have broadly shared prosperity as we look ahead.
And this is you brought up, broadband access, and this is where I keep coming back to 5G. We're not the world's leader in 5G technology, and this is the really important one. Because as it was explained to me, it's just not your cell phone and how fast you can look up whatever nonsense you're looking up on your phone. It's about how computers are talking to each other. It's about how automated vehicles are going to interact with each other. It's how our water systems and our critical infrastructure connect to each other. If we don't have that technology down, if we don't have that secure, we're extraordinarily vulnerable to, look, like you said, panic buying. Oh my gosh, they've shut the gas off for a day. Go get it all, and it's gonna be like toilet paper. You're gonna see it on eBay for $100 a roll.
That's right. This is the perfect example, and I hate to do a history lesson here, but I'm going to. Is when you have the mindset that it's okay to design and innovate here, but that you should make things somewhere else and we'll be okay. Well, all of this should shatter that notion, because our mindset was like, and led by Apple and lots of these other tech companies, is we could design this stuff here, but we're going to make it in Asia. And so look what happens when it comes to 5G. And we're many generations into this broadband technology. And there's not really, an enormous American-made ecosystem for manufacturing this equipment that you need for 5G. We don't want to depend on Huawei, which has strong connections to the Chinese government and represents a potential security threat. But also we're going to have to depend on Nokia, Ericsson, other firms that are multinational. But we lost this kind of indigenous capability because our attitude was like, we'll be fine. Someone else can make this. We'll just keep innovating and we'll make the next best thing and we'll be perfectly fine. Well, that theory doesn't work. And in fact, some Harvard professors have shown that, Willie Sheen and Gary Pisano, that when you lose the production, the innovation base slips as well. And so I think that the Biden focus on made in America, on investing in manufacturing, on investing in procurement and making sure it's buy America will be also very important to try to create demand and also the right incentives so that we are making that next generation of equipment here.
Yeah, see, I keep framing this, and I you probably won't come along with me, but I keep framing this as we're already in a new world of warfare. You call it manufacturing warfare, call it economic warfare. We're already in that. We're just losing. And we need to do like our grandparents' generation did, ramp up production. We got to turn those machines on, get those factories operating, and start pumping this stuff out and doing the innovation that comes with that. Because you're right, the further away from the manufacturing line you are, the less innovation you can do. If you're not producing something, you're not tinkering with it, you're not changing it, and you're not innovating.
Yeah. Well, look, it's certainly a form of aggression. And the policies in particular from Beijing have been very aggressive that way in terms of their acquisition of intellectual property through non-legal means, what they forced American companies to do with joint ventures and what have you, and then just market access and a whole bunch of other subsidies. Meanwhile, we've been playing this very philosophical game, led by, unfortunately, Republicans for a long time. We're like, through deregulation and low corporate taxes, we'll be able to attract more manufacturing in the United States and throw in a dash of free trade, with obviously the exception of Donald Trump didn't buy that last part. But that got us nowhere. In fact, it set us behind. And so we're playing catch up. And we do have to realize that there is a public policy role. There's a role for making smart government investments that can benefit and grow manufacturing, and that there's a different way to do that, and that it does matter where you make things, and that we are in competition, like you say, Rick. So I completely agree. And it doesn't mean that we need to be an autarky, that we are not dependent on anybody for anything. I mean, we do live in a globalized economy, but we do at least have to have the capabilities to make essential goods, make essential products, and certainly to recapture some of those markets that we've lost because of negligence over the last couple of decades.
And I would argue that the Chinese, they understand this war footing better than we do, because they're spending on influencing us. I'm sure you saw the Axios report that came out that China's increased their spending on influencing us like 500%. The kind of the stuff that they've been putting out, the social media influencing stuff, all of this, they've figured out from the Russians that it works.
Right, they do, and so they have like basically the state-owned media that has a presence in Washington. They get circulated around. They also hire Washington lobby firms to do their bidding for them. Squire Patton Boggs and some others have contracts with state-owned enterprises and the Chinese embassy and the government as well to do this. And I kind of believe that everybody deserves representation, but when you're trying to spin genocide or aggression, I think that's more difficult to do to justify it. And so it is that influence machine is enormous, and it's having an impact, unfortunately. And so I say this, and believe me, this should not be jingoistic. This should not be directed at Chinese nationals or Chinese Americans. This is about the actions of the government, of the Chinese Communist Party, and Xi Jinping, and his ruling class in particular, and what they've done. But it has to be countered. It has to be countered, and otherwise they're going to keep on doing it. They're going to double down on influence or double down on the economic espionage and other forms of aggression like that.
Oh, and the currency manipulation,
Absolutely.
the intellectual property theft, which I don't really care too much about. If you went over there and you got ripped off, that was your fault. But there's a lot of stuff that they keep getting away with that we just keep going, oh, well, maybe next time we'll stop it.
Yeah. Well, look, I do think that one thing that the Biden team has discovered is that, Trump talked about these trade issues, but his policies were very erratic. And ultimately he made a deal with China that fell very short of what was needed. But Biden realizes we can't go back to the way that they did it in the Obama administration or the Clinton administration either. And so we will continue to press them and to suggest that we need a bold, strong approach with China, one that will allow us to reclaim some of our market share and hold them accountable when they're not by the rules.
No, I understand. Real quick, I got about a minute left. We're moving possibly forward on some Buy American legislation that maybe we start reshoring manufacturing, something like that.
Yeah, I think it's pretty great. So tomorrow, the Senate Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee is marking up a number of bills designed to make us more economically competitive, including about 4 or 5 bills that would strengthen our procurement laws, our Buy America laws that we've been working on for 8 or 9 years. So this is most of these, in fact, all of these bills have bipartisan support. So we're very much looking forward to that, and we hope that we can get these signed into law.
You guys do amazing work, and I hope folks will check out your website. AmericanManufacturing.org is that website. Scott, always great talking with you. I appreciate you taking time for us and sharing your expertise.
Rick, keep up the great work. Have a great evening. Thanks for having me on.
Good stuff. Our good friend Scott Paul, president of the Alliance for American Manufacturing. Make sure you check out their website, AmericanManufacturing.org. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
Hello, I'm David Philman, Executive Director of AFSCME Council 13, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. A union of over 1.4 million strong and growing, AFSCME is gaining improvements in the workplace all across America. And right here in the Commonwealth, more than 95,000 AFSCME members make Pennsylvania happen. Highways, libraries, hospitals, parks, offices, prisons, classrooms, museums, courtrooms. You'll find AFSCME members at work in all these places and many more.
I make Pennsylvania happen every day.
I make Pennsylvania happen every day.
Today's AFSCME members take on public service jobs as diverse as they are, not for the recognition, but for a better Pennsylvania. For more information, please visit our website at AFSCME13.org. Labor is changing, so is your labor union. We are AFSCME.
We make Pennsylvania happen!
Is corporate ethics an oxymoron? Do you have to be a jerk to be a successful CEO? Is exploitation the only path to profit? The good news is that many companies, big and small, in the food economy are blazing a different path through Wall Street's jungle of greed, demonstrating that money and morality can be compatible. Texas supermarket chain H-E-B, for example, has drawn an intense loyal customer base by 1. Investing in good wages and benefits for employees, 2. Showing up in such emergencies as pandemics, hurricanes, freezes to give essential supplies and hands-on help, and 3. Being an involved and supportive neighbor to the hundreds of unique communities it serves. Also, Maine Grains is relocalizing the business of milling grain by working with local farmers who had been abandoned by global grain marketers. They're producing flours from heritage grains, boosting the local economy in the process. Then there's Bob's Red Mill, which also mills its products from diverse natural grains, and it's 100% employee-owned. These are part of a rising business alternative to the selfish profiteering ethic of Fortune 500 titans. Called certified B corporations, they definitely exist to make a profit, but they're equally focused on having a positive social impact, prioritizing fair wages, environmental protections, and healthy communities as core elements of their missions, even making those goals legal requirements of their corporate charter. This is Jim Hightower saying Ben & Jerry's and New Belgium Brewery are just a couple more of some 3,800 other businesses now organized as B Corps. Though not pretending to be perfect, they're at least striving to be more than money grubbers, instead trying to contribute to the common good. For more information, go to bcorporation.net. The Hightower Radio Lowdown is made possible by you lowdowners who subscribe to our monthly newsletter, The Hightower Lowdown. You know who you are. Thank you.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So big news today, the horse that won the Kentucky Derby, they had some drug problems maybe. Evidently going to be able to race in the Preakness Stakes coming up this weekend. And from what I'm reading, this is the first time they've let a horse that has had drug problems run in another race. And this part of me goes, I kind of get the fairness. The drug test was wrong. You get to do this, but what if it wasn't? And he wins another one. That's going to be interesting. But here to share some thoughts on, the Medina Spirit horse, the race. Our horse racing expert, asked our good friend Travis Waldron to come back and talk with us. He's a reporter over at Huffington Post. He covers politics and sports in Brazil and across the U.S. And is in Kentucky where the Derby actually happened. You may remember our conversation about the valets who may have gone on strike. Travis, thanks for taking time for us.
Of course.
So let's start with the strike. Didn't happen. I was kind of surprised. Didn't happen.
It didn't happen. I wouldn't say I'm completely surprised that it didn't happen. I mentioned, I think when I was on the show, that the valets at Churchill and other tracks, they also, a lot of their compensation comes from commission-based agreements with jockeys and trainers. And so the Derby Day is obviously a big money day for them in that front too. So, but at the very least, it seems they got an agreement to keep talking and negotiating about the contract on better terms than what they thought they had before the race.
Well,
so
I wish them the best, and I hope they get a good contract and they get what they deserve. Let's talk about this Medina Spirit horse. 12-1 odds. I wish I'd have put money down.
I had him in my bet, but I didn't have the other horses.
Oh, so you can't just pick the winner? You got to pick other ones too?
Well, you can, but I tried to pick the top two, and I picked number 1 and number 3, but not number 2, which you don't get anything for that.
Yeah, you get nothing for that. But the horse won and has some drug issues. What are the drug issues? What for those of us who don't know much about horse racing, what is the issue?
So it was a drug that was a corticosteroid, so not like an anabolic performance enhancing steroid, but more like an anti-inflammatory, I guess. I'm not a pharmacist or a drug expert, so I'm not exactly sure what the drug itself was, but or even how to pronounce it necessarily.
Right.
But now Bob Baffert, the trainer, is claiming that it came from a dermatitis treatment. This is like his third set of claims for what it came from. So, who knows? And as several horse racing journalists have written this week, this is not the first time Bob Baffert has had these sorts of questions around his horses, and not the first time that a lot of these questions have been raised about horse racing, although it is pretty much the biggest one ever at the Kentucky Derby, at least in recent times. And the test is still outstanding, I guess. They're testing a split sample. So even though he's running in the Preakness this week, it's still possible that his Derby win gets invalidated, which is a bummer for the horse because he didn't have anything to do with it.
Yeah. Well, I don't think the horse knows either way. But
right.
What about the people who placed bets and won? What if you picked the secondary winner horse and you got cheated? You got stiffed.
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't gamble enough to know the answer to that question necessarily. I assume that they would somehow pay back the people who at least had the number 2 horse, because it would be a pretty big bummer if you bet him to win and now he's the winner. We did have there was a controversy at the Derby a couple years ago where there was a disqualification, but that happened basically in real time. This is, we're now a week later, or I guess almost 2 weeks later. So I don't know how they would handle it, but luckily I haven't had to worry about it because my bets all were wrong, matter what they decide.
Yeah, but what happens if you won? Do they come back and try and claw back their money from you? How would they know?
I assume they don't do that. I can't imagine how that would be logistical.
But it's just terrible. But so now this horse is going to run in the next race. Has that happened before? I mean, because, I was sitting there thinking about, all the talk about cancel culture, and because this Baffert guy did a really great job of going out there and using that frame. They've used it so much that they influenced the board of this race to go, oh yeah, we'll make an exception this one time in like a gazillion years just for you because you used the word cancel culture.
Right. It's amazing that cancel culture is now just, and it always has been at this point, like whatever you want it to be, against any sort of criticism whatsoever. I'm not positive that it doesn't seem like there's ever been a case like this. I'm not sure there has ever been a case to even sort of test it on this level. Like I mentioned, there was a disqualification in the Derby a few years ago, but that had to do with an on-track infraction, not a random drug test. And so, I don't know that the people running the Preakness have ever had to deal with something like this coming out of the Derby, at least not. I think there was one Derby horse disqualified for a drug test back in the 60s maybe, but it hasn't happened anytime recently. And so it's kind of an unprecedented, weird situation. And then you throw on that horse racing is regulated by the states. So there's Kentucky and Churchill Downs and Maryland and Pimlico kind of all have their own jurisdictions and get to set their own rules and decide what they want to do. So there's not like one big national governing body that says, oh, you messed up in Kentucky, so now you can't run in Maryland.
Right. I can see that. Maybe there should be. We'll see. We'll see how this plays out. Any chance the horses can actually win? Because it's now, I guess, a 9-5 favorite. Is that what I'm reading?
Yeah, I mean, I think other than last year, Baffert's undefeated when he takes a Derby winner to the Preakness, which last year they ran him out of order, so it doesn't really count. But, I wouldn't bet against him, but I'm probably not going to bet it because I threw away my money last weekend.
Yeah, I haven't gambled in probably 30 years because I hate losing, and it is what it is. I did want to change topics. We'll see how the race turns out. Move over to another race, the race to get DC statehood. You're part of a team that's come out with an article. There's never been a good argument against DC statehood. Why has it taken so long to get statehood for DC? I mean, this is something that 30 years ago I remember people arguing for.
I mean, the shortest answer is the most obvious one, which is that it's racism. DC for most of its history has been a majority black population. It's currently right under a majority black population and still majority minority. It's, I think, about 46% black and I think 11 to 12% Hispanic and Latino. So, I mean, I think that's it's part and parcel with the disenfranchisement of black people that has gone on through the entire history of this country. The longer answer is that, and if you talk to the activists here, they'll say that, not enough Americans and not enough lawmakers have ever cared about the plight of DC or even really been aware of the plight of DC and what a lack of statehood means. That there's this perception of Washington, DC, that it's just the swamp, to borrow a phrase from our 45th president, and that it's full of corrupt politicians and nothing else. And it erases the fact that there are 700,000 people who live here, that those people are not all, and not even nearly all, politicians or even working in politics. It's just like any other city or town or state in the rest of the country. But in the past, there hasn't been the political will to get it across the finish line. The last time they fully voted on statehood in the House before the last 2 years was 1993, and it didn't even pass in the House. And I'm sure a lot of your listeners remember 2009 when there was a fight for a congressional vote just to give DC a congressional vote, not statehood. And it passed in the Senate, but failed in the House because the Republicans attached a amendment that would have basically overridden DC's gun restrictions. And so the thing here is that, again, it's a mix of the same sort of disenfranchisement of black and brown people that has been a part of this country's history since its founding. And also the fact that, people just, I don't think even realize that DC is a city where real people live, and that statehood causes a whole lot of problems and a whole lot of disenfranchisement and, really a total absence of democracy for the people who live in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, I mean, on January 6th, you had a local government that had no ability to call out the National Guard because there is no National Guard. They had to go to Maryland.
Right. And, there is a DC National Guard, but DC doesn't really control it. A lot of times it has to be mobilized by the federal government.
Right.
And that was the case, both, kind of twin cases from opposite sides of during the racial justice protests that took place last summer. And then during the insurrection, in one hand, Trump was able to mobilize the National Guard to end the military, to essentially occupy the city. On the other hand, the mayor of Washington had basically no authority to mobilize the National Guard ahead of the Capitol riots when it was obvious that there was a threat to the Capitol in that day. And that's just, run down the reasons of, that's a recent symbolic, obvious example of how this messes up DC, but there are so many others. A few years ago, we voted to legalize marijuana here, and Congress basically blocked it. And so now we're in this weird gray area where marijuana is legal to possess and use, but not to sell. And all because Congress exerted an authority over the district that they cannot exert over Colorado or California or Washington or anywhere else.
So you can give it away, but you can't sell it.
You can give it away, but you can't sell it. So
Okay.
we have it was basically a loophole in the way that the Home Rule Act and everything works, that allowed for a partial implementation of the law, but not full regulatory atmosphere to be, regulatory regime to be set up to allow for legal dispensaries and other methods of selling.
Right. Now, obviously, this is a political issue because if D.C. were to be a state, you'd get 2 more Democratic senators. I don't see there being any way a Republican wins in D.C. On the short term or even the long term. So, obviously the Republican voters are going to say, no, we can't possibly do this because this is all it's really about. And some of that's true from the outside. As I look into it, I go, look, they should have representation, and 2 additional senators would not be a bad thing.
Yeah, look, it's a fact of the matter that if Washington, D.C. gets 2 senators and congressional representation, there are going to be 3 more Democrats in the Capitol from Washington, D.C. Like, this city voted 95-5 in the last presidential election, and that wasn't because it was Donald Trump. And it was similar numbers when it was Obama versus Romney. It was similar numbers when it was Clinton versus Bush or Clinton versus Dole and Bush versus Gore and so on and so on. But, for one, the Constitution doesn't say you don't get to be a state if you vote for a different party than someone else would prefer. 2, it's just as partisan for Republicans to oppose DC statehood because it would produce 2 more Democratic senators as it is for Democrats to support it because it would produce two more Democratic senators. And 3, and the main reason, is that the residents of Washington, D.C. are not pushing this because they want 2 Democratic senators. The people behind statehood, the statehood movement in D.C. is based on the fact that they want representation in Congress and they want the right to govern themselves.
So let me ask you this, wouldn't the simple solution be, just add them to Maryland or Virginia or, just add them somewhere? Okay, you're part of this state now. You're just a city. You're Washington, D.C. in the city in the state of Maryland or Virginia. Couldn't you do that?
So retrocession to Maryland is a newly popular idea on the right. You have people like Freedom Works pushing it, and then Mitt Romney, Susan Collins, a lot of lawmakers in the House are pushing it. But the thing is retrocession doesn't really solve the problem. In fact, it's a perfect example of the problem, which is that DC wants the right to choose its own representation, and retrocession is a solution that would be forced on DC. DC and Maryland touch each other, but they're very distinct, different places. DC hasn't been a part of Maryland for more than 200 years. If you go down the list of states, including Mitt Romney's, including Susan Collins, those weren't states. Those were part of other states. The last time DC, or in the case of Utah, didn't even remotely exist. Florida, for instance, as we wrote in the story, was part of Spain the last time DC was a part of Maryland.
Can we give Florida back to Spain?
Look, that's a conversation for a different day. But when it comes down to it, neither Maryland nor DC supports retrocession of DC to Maryland. It would completely change the politics of Maryland. It would completely, basically fold Washington, DC into a state with which it doesn't identify and isn't a part of and hasn't been a part of at any point, anywhere near anyone who's alive's life. And the people of DC have voted, they have spoken, they want statehood, they prefer statehood. And as far as I can tell, like we put in the headline right there's not, when you really go down through it, there's not really a good argument against it. People cite retrocession, they cite various parts of the Constitution, but none of it really addresses the fact or answers the question of why don't the people of Washington, D.C. deserve the sort of representation that they have said they want?
Because that's why. Because I said
Right.
so.
That's essentially what it boils down to.
Yeah, because I said so. So how do you go about doing this? Do we need a constitutional amendment? You said Congress has to vote. How would this work? How would it happen? Because it's not just D.C. There are people talking about statehood for Puerto Rico and other territories. How does this game work?
So, with regard to HR 51, the law that's in the legislation that passed the House each of the last two sessions, there's a belief among advocates for statehood in DC and in Congress, obviously, that this can be done through simple legislation. That's the way that I believe all 37 new states were added to the union. There's an argument that DC requires a constitutional amendment because the Constitution requires a federal district, but HR 51 specifically carves out, I think it's about 2 square miles around the Capitol, the National Mall, and the White House to remain the federal district, and just makes the residential areas of DC the new state. The Eleanor Holmes Norton, who is the DC non-voting delegate to Congress, argues that that's perfectly enough to satisfy the constitutional requirement. It's a little bit different than Puerto Rico and other territories, just because while there are, especially with regards to Puerto Rico, statehood movements, there are more complicated questions about colonialism and potential independence there. Whereas with DC, like we've had referendums twice, overwhelmingly have voted for statehood. And so, really, there's no question where the District of Columbia stands on statehood. The city council, the mayor, the delegate to Congress, and the population are all united behind the idea that they want statehood.
They are surrounded by states. It would be nice if they were one.
Right, exactly. And it would be nice to have your own representatives in Congress and your own government.
People you can yell at and scream at. I'm right there with them. Sadly, I don't think it's going to happen, but so I guess last question I've got, because if we have to go if this legislative route is the way to go, is this something that can be done through budget reconciliation? Because it is never getting 60 votes.
I don't think it can be done through reconciliation, but the main group pushing statehood, or one of the main coalitions pushing statehood in DC right now, is called 51 for 51, which, as their name suggests, they want it to be able to be done with 51 votes, a simple majority in the Senate. And what they advocate for is a kind of smaller filibuster reform, not a whole-scale abolition of the filibuster, but a filibuster change or rules change that means that a statehood bill could go through with a simple majority of the Senate.
Yeah.
Again, that seems pretty unlikely.
Here's my problem with that. The second you crack that door open, it's going to give the Republicans the reason to kick it completely off the hinges. So if you're going to crack the door open, just kick it off the hinges.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that the people behind 51 for 51 are necessarily opposed to a full-scale abolition of the filibuster, but with regards to the movement itself, they leave it, just a statehood bill should be able to move through here, because other states have been created out of simple majorities. And again, if you go down, other states have been created through legislation. Other states, even if you take the argument that it is only about Democratic senators, many other states were created for purely partisan reasons. And, so there's, as far as I can tell, again, like I'm hardly an unbiased source here. I live in DC. I think statehood is good, because I think people deserve representation in democracy. But even setting those aside, if you look at the arguments against it, I just don't think any of them hold water, except unless your position is, I don't want statehood.
No, or because I said so. If you've got a thought on it, I'd love to hear it. If there's a good reason out there why DC shouldn't be a state, I want to hear it. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. You can also check out Travis's article over at Huffington Post. There's never been a good argument against DC statehood. We'll get links out on social media on how you can take a look at that. Travis, I appreciate your time. Always great talking with you. Keep up the great work, man.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
anytime. Our good friend Travis Waldron. Again, check out that piece. We'll make sure we get links out. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to the Rick Smith Show.
Saving work in America, one show at a time. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1967. That was the day United Farm Workers Sons of Zapata joined with the Confederation of Mexican Workers in establishing an international picket line across the Rio Grande Valley. A push to organize farm workers at 6 major growers began the year before, in the spring of 1966. Wages in Starr County ranged from 40 to 85 cents an hour. Farm workers began their strike in June of 1966 for wage increases and union recognition. But growers would rather see their crops rot than recognize the union. They did grant wage increases, but immediately ran to the courts for injunctions. One district judge outlawed all picketing, while police instructed county workers to spray the strikers with insecticide. That August, workers voted to organize with the United Farm Workers and began a pilgrimage march to the state capitol to popularize their cause. 15,000 workers and their supporters reached Austin on Labor Day to demand their right to organize. They returned to Stark County to continue their strike. The growers turned to Mexican commuters holding green cards to break the strike. The United Farm Workers began picketing at Roma and Rio Grande City bridges and were often successful in turning back green card workers. By May 1967, melon harvest had begun. After months of negotiations, picket lines went up on both sides of the international bridges. The picketing was 100% successful for 2 days, but the Mexican government and Starr County Sheriff's Department soon intervened to break up the picket lines. Texas Rangers were brought in to arrest and brutalize strikers. The strike was broken, but organizing continued throughout the region. Picketing across borders was itself an important act of international solidarity. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So some good news on the National Rifle Association, the NRA. You may remember they tried to declare bankruptcy, even though they had millions of dollars in the bank. They tried to declare bankruptcy because they were about to be sued in a pretty big way. And in fact, they were chartered in the state of New York from like 1871. So just recently they're like, no, we're going to Texas, because Texas has better laws to get away from, being sued. So I guess what happened was the judge said, no, you're not going to be able to game the system. You filed this suit in bad faith. They said the petition was not filed in good faith, but rather an effort to gain unfair litigation advantage against the New York Attorney General, Letitia James, because there's a civil suit there. I'm glad to see this. This is going to be one of those moments where you're going to have to pay up. Dig deep. You're not going to have the money to maybe ask Vlad to send over some money from Russia, something. Get Maria Butina back out there, peddling some guns. But you're going to get sued. Moving to Texas or not. This, as I was reading this, I'm going, but this is what the rich in corporate America have been getting away with forever. They run things into the ground. They file bankruptcy, and oops. And they stick the little guy with all the leftovers, with all of the external costs, with all of the pollution, with all the degradation, with all the fallout. And I'm glad that the court said, nope, no one's above the law. Good for that judge. Also, some good news today. Vineyard Wind, new project there off of Martha's Vineyard. This is something they've been talking about for a while. The go-ahead was approved today They're talking about 62 turbines of wind power off the coast of Martha's Vineyard. They say it's going to produce enough electricity for 400,000 homes. It's going to create, they say, about 3,600 jobs. This will be done, I guess, some part by 2030. And we're gonna be moving away from the fossil fuels and towards the renewable energy, which is something we need to be doing. Look, if this Colonial Pipeline thing showed us anything, our infrastructure really vulnerable. And I go back to the year 2000 when everyone thought the world was going to end because of Y2K. Did we learn nothing from that moment? Literally, everyone thought because we were so dependent on computers, so dependent on all of the things being computerized, that we had no idea what was going to happen. And you would have thought back then we would have tried to decentralize a little bit, try and I don't know. But I'll tell you, this is one of those moments where if I'm Biden, I'm out there often talking about this is why we need massive infrastructure spending. This is why we need to be energy independent. We need to stop drill baby drilling. We need to stop being dependent on foreign countries for other things. We're in a state of economic warfare. Just my thought. Love to hear yours. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Going to take a quick break. When we come back, Matthew Chapman, reporter over at RawStory, is going to be here to share some of his top stories of the day. Quick break. Right back with Matt.
Waving the flag of freedom for people, not corporations. Rick Smith.
Colonial Pipeline delivers nearly half of all the diesel and gasoline to the East Coast, and it's delivering it to the Northeast, which is the least energy independent part of the entire country.
America's largest pipeline system shut down by major cyber attack. Air pollution from farms kills thousands of Americans every year, new study finds. Ominous warnings of deepening drought in California. Plus, Biden moves to restore landmark protection for birds.
All of those stories for the birds and more straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
People like Lindsey Graham, this is him a few days ago, I've come to conclude that climate change is real. Well, welcome to 1990, Lindsey.
This is your Green News Report.
Pull up a beanbag chair.
Okay, Desi Doyen, when I saw this cyber attack on the Colonial Pipeline, I was trying to think, what did we cover them recently? And in fact, they were the company that had a pipeline spill in the North Carolina Nature Preserve. They said last year it was 63,000 gallons. Turns out this year we learned it was more than 1 million gallons. Well, I guess Colonial Pipeline is back in the news again today.
Yes, sadly, they are. The Colonial Pipeline system, the largest in the nation, that delivers 45% of fossil fuel supplies to the East Coast, was shut down over the weekend by what appears to be the largest ever ransomware attack on U.S. energy infrastructure to date.
Well, I guess somebody has finally figured out how to shut down Colonial Pipeline.
The FBI identified a known foreign criminal ransomware gang as responsible. The pipeline company says the cyber attack hit only IT networks, not operations. As we go to air, it's unclear when full operation will be restored, but the company says it is restarting it in stages.
Well, if the company says something, I guess we ought to believe them. Am I right?
The Biden administration is assisting the company and issued a regional emergency declaration to ensure distribution of fuel supplies. Experts say, depending on the shutdown's duration, there may be price spikes and shortages in some regions. The incident highlights the huge vulnerabilities in the nation's aging infrastructure. According to cybersecurity expert Rob Lee on CNN, it won't be the last cyber attack on U.S. infrastructure.
All of our industries are going through some level of a digital transformation, which means they're becoming more and more connected. Everybody is vulnerable. We are going to experience attacks. The real question is, how can we be more responsive and more resilient in the face of those attacks so that the consequence doesn't impact our daily lives?
Now, President Biden's American Jobs Plan has an answer for that. It includes funding to harden U.S. infrastructure cybersecurity overall. But from a risk management perspective, reliance on a single company for half of the East Coast's fuel supply is suboptimal.
Yes. And by the way, doing anything about this would be against the Republican rule that infrastructure is only things, made of concrete, like roads and bridges, I guess, right?
Yep. There's that, too. In other news, air pollution from farms kills nearly 18,000 Americans every year.
Oh, great.
That's according to a first-of-its-kind study of emissions from hog farms in North Carolina that examined residents' complaints of respiratory and heart ailments from noxious fumes emanating from the expansion of massive hog farms and manure waste lagoons after the North Carolina legislature weakened regulations. In one North Carolina county, the study linked 89 premature deaths directly to emissions caused by the nearby hog farms.
Wow.
Nationally, the researchers estimate almost 18,000 premature deaths across the United States could be attributed to farm air pollution, and they pinpoint meat production as the leading source.
I guess Biden's going to have to ban beef again.
In California, ominous signs of deepening drought. Water stored in the state's mountain snowpack is essentially gone, down to just 8% of average for this time of year. Early season heat waves caused the rapid snow melt, which has led to an unusually early spate of critical fire weather conditions with record dry vegetation for the month of May. But some good news.
Thank you.
Electric cars, vans, and SUVs will be cheaper for car makers to produce than fossil fuel vehicles by 2027. That's according to a new forecast from Bloomberg New Energy Finance, which projects that larger vehicles like SUVs will be as cheap to produce as conventional gas and diesel vehicles by 2026 and smaller cars by 2027.
Nice.
Bloomberg attributes this fast inflection point to the rapidly falling costs of manufacturing batteries, as well as car makers ramping up production lines dedicated solely to electric vehicles.
So they'll be the same price, hopefully, as a internal combustion car, and yet you'll never have to pay for gas ever again.
Exactly. Finally, great news for birds. The Biden administration has finally begun the process of revoking a Trump administration rule change that gutted the Migratory Bird Treaty Act that would have allowed industry and individuals to kill unlimited birds as long as they claimed it was unintentional. The Biden administration has proposed new rules to replace the old Trump rules.
And presumably, they're better rules.
Yes.
For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, please check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
New book out by the Pulitzer Prize-winning Washington Post reporter Carol Leoning. Evidently, the claim is that the Trump family in deep with the Secret Service agents, and it's one of these kind of things where you're going, maybe leave the Secret Service agents alone. This is bad. But evidently they were servicing the agents. I guess that's the way it's being spun because Donald Trump Jr.'s wife evidently is dating the former Secret Service agent that used to protect them. So this was part of the thing going on the whole time. And they went through. I guess her book is kind of like the whole family took a turn at one point or another. So there you go. The scandals never end. Anyway, here to share some thoughts on the top stories of the day, maybe even a little bit about the, as the Trump turns. I've asked our good friend Matthew Chapman to come talk with us. Matthew is a reporter over at RawStory, where he does fantastic work. RawStory.com, the website. Matthew, thanks for taking time for us.
Great to be back, Rick.
So what do you think of this salacious, just coincidence that all these Trump women are finding Secret Service agents to go running off with?
I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't doubt this story for a second. It just seems very on brand for the Trump family.
Let's go to something my Republican voters will really be thrilled with. And they'll be really happy with. Vladimir Putin scored 8 goals, leading his team to a 13-9 victory in the game that Vlad plays every year.
Absolutely. He absolutely crushed it out there. He was moving around that puck so much it looked like the other team wasn't even trying to beat him.
Is it one of those situations where if you see him up against the boards, you just don't? Or if you do take that shot, you cross-check him into the boards, do you end up in a gulag somewhere?
I don't know. I think the best encapsulation of this whole thing was a couple of years ago when he did the same thing, scored a ton of goals, and then on the victory lap, he face planted on the ice.
And then he melted the ice just for spite.
Well, you'd think he could melt ice by glaring at it.
Yeah. There is that. It was one of those things I always thought that Trump would try at one point. Some kind of spectacle that, people would let him, golf isn't one of those things that, people are going to really watch and score as much, especially since I'm sure he does a lot of kicking out of the woods. But, I always thought he would do something to make himself look like Kim Jong-il used to, say he bowled, the only time he went bowling, he had a 300 game. He played golf at 18 holes and won. That kind of legend stuff. I was kind of expecting that out of the former guy.
Well, strong men, or in the case of Trump, I guess you could call him aspiring strong men. They have a lot of different ways of projecting their strength. I think Trump was just happy with the sort of photo ops he did, holding that Bible upside down outside a church, dragging the troops out to pose with them whenever he wanted. There's all sorts of different ways of doing it.
Good point. I wanted to get your thoughts on Liz Cheney. She says she's not going down without a fight. She's out there giving it her all, and I care even less than I did yesterday, which was none. And cared even less yesterday than I did before, which was none. But I'm curious your thoughts.
Well, I think we can all agree that Cheney's not really in step with progressive values for certain. But, what does seem to be obvious is that she isn't comfortable promoting a lie that would just completely undermine the foundations of democracy. In that sense, I guess we can applaud her. I think Republicans are not going to get what they're hoping for out of this. When they purge people, there'll always be a new set of people who are just disloyal enough to purge. And, one day they're going to wake up and find they purged everyone but like the very hardcore.
Yeah, but they're the party they're the Big Tent party, they said. Which I when I heard that, I'm going, since when? When has that party been the homogenous party of white old guys? When's that been a Big Tent party?
Well, to be fair, you do need a pretty big tent to house that kind of circus.
Yeah, but here's the thing. They're the party of Donald Trump. They're the party of Marjorie Taylor Greene. They're the party of Lauren Boebert. They're the party of, the guy who's having sex with underage girls and paying them on, Venmo or whatever it is. That's who they are now.
It is. And they're every day being more and more like a personality cult is the problem. And that's where Liz Cheney had to get off. She's a hardcore conservative, but she's interested in the weeds of the stuff. She's interested in advancing conservative policy. She didn't sign up to kiss the ring of a tyrant.
And here's the thing, and this is the part that puts me in this weird spot, because I do respect the fact that she's willing to stand up to them and say, no, I'm not going to lie for you. No, the former guy didn't win. There aren't Chinese ballots. There are no ballots from Mars. None of this conspiracy nonsense happened. Stop it. I do respect that. But I think her ideas and her policies have been horrible for this country, and anything she would come up in the future, I think, is just as bad. So I have bad on this side, and then I got horrible, people who want to destroy the Capitol and defecate on the floor and urinate on desks. I got them on the other side. So, for me, there's really nothing left in the Republican Party to salvage.
I think you're right. I think that, honestly, the fact is that I hope that sometime in the future there will be a massive realigning election that changes the Republican Party into something that is, workable within the framework of democracy. And, the optimist in me says that history shows these realignments do happen. But, for the time being, this party has just proven itself to be a horrendous danger to all of the institutions that we hold dear.
Yeah. Now the person who's going to replace her, this Elise Stefanik, what's the MO on her?
Well, it's a really funny thing. So at the time that she won her seat, it was kind of a swingy district, and in some ways it still is. It actually did swing back towards Biden in 2020. But the thing is, she started out running as a moderate. She was endorsed by Romney and stuff. Although, to be fair, that was back in the era when Romney wasn't really considered a moderate. But the thing is that she realized that to advance her career, she needed to be more of a personality cultist. So that's what she did. And the change really, you could really start seeing it during the first impeachment. That's when she really started taking the spotlight, became a national name, and grandstanded in Trump's favor.
No, I mean, and that seems to be what you've got more than anything. You've got these new Republicans who have come in. They're not ideological as much as they're basically reality TV stars who are looking for their niche to get famous so they can cash in. I mean, I look at the one from Colorado with the gun stuff. Immediately, she came in with really slick videos and really well done image kind of stuff that really stuck her ground as she's the gun chick, man. She's gun Nazi Barbie. And she's not going away from it at all. And, that's her niche. And it seems like you've got these people that's what they're trying to do more than actually legislate or represent their voters. It's about making their image.
Absolutely. I mean, and you mentioned Marjorie Taylor Greene, too. I mean, ever since she was stripped of her committee assignments, she's been languishing in total irrelevance in terms of policymaking. And basically, the only way that she's ever relevant from a congressional day-to-day stance is that she takes these random votes to adjourn the House just for the hell of it. And it annoys even Republicans.
But here's the thing, and I'll be honest, I've been saying it for the longest time. I was against having her kicked off the Labor and Education committees. I don't think Democrats should have been doing anything to help Republicans out of their nightmare. I want her on the Education Committee, so every time I go, we need more education funding, I look at her and go, see, this is why. We need more education funding. As my son
I suppose that's possible.
As my son always said, she's not worthless. She serves as a bad example.
That's certainly not a bad image. I mean, I would argue that stripping of her committee assignments hasn't really shut her up as much as many people were afraid of. But I definitely see your point.
No, what's it? There's a quote. I used it yesterday. It's attributed to Sun Tzu that when your enemy's going down, let them. Get out of the way when they're destroying themselves. Let them. Get out of the way. Let them go. Give them some more rope. Good luck. Try and save them.
Exactly. There's a story just tonight about a bunch of former Republican staffers led by Miles Taylor who are threatening to form their own third conservative party if the Republicans don't make changes.
Good.
That's the sort of thing we should stand back and let happen.
I'm in favor of it. Good, you go. I'm encouraging it. I want Liz Cheney to start a party. Let her and Mitt Romney start one.
Absolutely. I mean, obviously, I could never see her switching parties, but I could definitely see her becoming a conservative independent the way Justin Amash was.
Yeah. No, I mean, we had Joe Walsh on the program last night, former Tea Party guy from Illinois. And, he's saying,
look, I know him. I'm good friends with him.
Yeah. He's saying, look, I don't have a home. I've got nowhere to go. He goes, I'm not a Democrat. That's never going to happen. And I'm no longer this. And I'm going, well, start a party. Grab Liz Cheney, grab Mitt Romney, grab a couple of them, and Kinzinger from Illinois. Start your own party. Met with silence. But because
I don't have much to add to that.
No, because at the end of it, the weird thing for me though, Matthew, is that the Republican Party is who they are. I mean, they may look crazy with the Marjorie Taylor Greenes and the Boeberts and the Gates. They may look crazy on the national level, but when you start looking down to the local level, I'm looking here where I live in Pennsylvania at the choices for the Republicans to pull out for governor, someone like Doug Mastriano, and I'm going, crazy white Christian nationalist? Really? Is this who we want running for governor in 2022? These extremists who are the ones who are stopping the steal and we're going to storm the Capitol and having these basic, these idiotic protests during the heart of a pandemic because they didn't want to wear a mask. These are the people who are running for state government. These are the people who are running for city council. These are the people who are running for your freaking school boards. The people who are saying during a pandemic, no, send all the kids into school. Nuts.
The irony is you would think as a very gerrymandered state, at least at the legislative level still, Pennsylvania would have a big bench of Republicans to pick from. But, that might also be part of the problem because, with the gerrymandering, they don't really have to hold themselves accountable to voters because they pick their own voters.
No, but here's the thing, and this is where I think a lot of people haven't really figured out what's going on with the Republican Party because, I believe Republican voters, I do believe there are some Republican voters who do want some bipartisanship. They do want good things. I think what's happened with the Republican Party over the last 20 years is they keep marching further to the right. The moneyed interests keep moving them further and further to the extreme. You got talk radio who fuels this extremism. You've got Fox News who fuels this kind of, you're never pure enough. And no matter who you are as an elected official, as a Republican, you've always got to be worrying about your right. Somebody crazier than you are is going to come out and beat you to the further extreme, and they have just marched to the end, almost to the end of the earth at this point, to where now there are people defending what happened on January 6th. There are people now calling themselves 1-6ers.
I agree, and I would argue that the gradual loss of the suburbs has really accelerated this process because time was. The suburbs were conservative, but they were kind of a moderate type of conservative who just wanted, a sensible, pragmatic leader who would cut their taxes. And, so that was the kind of Republican who would win in a state like Colorado or Arizona. And, as those suburbs have defected to the Democratic Party, there's no real moderating force left in the primaries for Republicans. So you just get radical people who just believe insane things, and there's nothing to challenge them.
No, and look, I said
nothing
earlier,
other than a general election, obviously.
I said earlier, if 9/11 were to happen today, and it was the DNC was in one of those towers, you'd have Republicans cheering it, which is scary and freaky to me on a whole bunch of levels. But I'm in this spot where I don't doubt it.
Maybe not the leaders, but certainly a few talk radio hosts.
Yeah, I mean it's crazy times. Last story of the day. I got to get to something little funnier because earlier I said we should give Florida back to Spain, and that'd be. But evidently a Florida guy, Florida man, back again. I guess he tried to use a taxi as a getaway car after robbing a bank.
Yep, that was certainly a novel choice in that it would, telegraph exactly for the sheriffs how to find him.
No, it wasn't an Uber or anything, was it? He didn't prepay for the ride.
I mean, I would say that. I mean, it certainly seems to have been like more of a conventional cab service.
Yeah.
I forget the name of the company. But
Johnny on the spot taxi service.
Yeah, that's the one.
I mean, you can't miss that one because he was right there. Now, how did they catch the guy? Did the cab take him home and they just roll up and grab him?
Yeah, cab took him home and they went to his home.
So for, I guess, like a little over $8,000, he's going to probably spend 25 years in jail.
Yep.
And yet you get someone like Jeff Bezos who just is in the process of building a $500 million floating who knows what with 3 masts, and that's fine.
Its own mini yacht to service it. And meanwhile, you've got Amazon delivery drivers peeing in bottles.
Well, someone's got to pay that $500 million to get the yacht-sized dinghy. Crazy, crazy times, my friend. But always good stuff from you, Matthew. I appreciate the work you do over there at RawStory. Keep it up. I look forward to talking to you again.
Will do. Can't wait to see you again.
Good stuff, Matthew Chapman. Make sure you check out his work over at RawStory. RawStory.com is the website. We'll get links out on social media. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. Listen to The Rick Smith Show.
Saving work in America, one show at a time. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1894. That was the first day of the Pullman strike. The strike started in the company town of Pullman, on the south side of Chicago, where workers made luxury sleeping cars for passenger trains. As a depression swept the nation, workers had seen their wages slashed, but rents owed to the company owner George Pullman stayed the same. The strike won support from the American Railway Union and its leader, Eugene V. Debs. The American Railway Union called for a boycott of all Pullman cars, and more than 250,000 railway workers participated in the work action against Pullman. The strike was crushed by legal injunctions and with federal troops. In a case that went all the way to the Supreme Court, Eugene V. Debs was imprisoned for his support of the boycott. One prominent supporter of the strike was Chicago area Reverend William H. Cardewine. The Reverend supported the strikers from his pulpit. After the strike, his book, The Pullman Strike, helped spread the word of Pullman. In it, he warned, "We as a nation are dividing ourselves, like ancient Rome, into two classes, the rich and the poor, the oppressor and the oppressed. On the side of the oppressor, there is power and protection, class legislation, and military support. We are following in the tracks of ancient Rome," he wrote, "instead of learning lessons from her failures and defeats. No country can prosper, no government long perpetuate itself and its institutions, which does not administer judgment and justice alike to all its people." These words from Reverend Carwadine seem more relevant than ever today. Will we heed his warning?
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So, I had an interesting, ad from the NRA yesterday that I tweeted out. Mother and a little girl, probably 6-7 years old, with they got their AR-15s, with the mama didn't raise a victim, and I'm going, how many kids that age end up shooting themselves by accident? And is that really the image that you're putting forth? And I know, the NRA's their job is to sell guns, but is that the market now? 5 and 6 years old? Is that it? Is that where we're heading? Very, very scary times indeed. As if we don't have enough problems with guns. Like I said yesterday, we had over the weekend. You had a birthday party shot up. You had, a 6th grade girl going and shoot up her classroom. You've had all these stories pop up, and not even thoughts and prayers anymore. And I guess they were having a hearing today on gun violence, and I guess Ted Cruz, was basically called out for being wrong, because the ideology is guns don't kill people, and we need more guns, and guns are good. And the reality is not that simple. Sane, rational policy, something that we've really, really gotten away from. And this is where this divide this divide has worked well for the special interests. Do I like the fact that one of our political parties is crazy right now? No, it's not good for our country. It's not good for democracy. It's not good for the future. It's not good for our economy. It's not good for any of that stuff It's not good for our politics to have wide swings and ideological views and us being so far apart. Not good, especially when you look at the fact that the rest, our enemies, I would argue China, an enemy, is moving full steam ahead to basically eat our lunch and take over and basically steal everything we've got. And we're focused somewhere completely else on idiotic fights and ridiculous issues. But it's how they've always worked it. It's how they've always kept us at each other's throats. And sadly, and I was talking about this today, I used to have Republican friends that you could have a conversation with and walk away from each other going, yeah, I'll talk to you tomorrow. I said, I'll meet you in the parking lot. Those days seem to be gone. Do we get back there? I don't know. I'd love to figure it out. Anyway, if you missed any of today's program, thericksmithshow.com. That's where you go to get the podcast. The Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you go. And as always, you can email me, Rick, at thericksmithshow.com. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you back here next time.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Email Rick at rick@thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.